The engine's hum died as Grace Williams turned the key, the sleek black sedan rolling to a stop at the curb. The flashing lights in her rear-view mirror painted the interior in alternating bursts of red and blue, a disorienting rhythm that did nothing to steady her already racing heart. She took a slow breath, fingers tightening around the steering wheel before forcing herself to relax. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't run a light. There was no reason for this stop. None, at least, that would hold up under scrutiny. The knock on her window came hard, the sound sharp enough to make her flinch. She turned her head, meeting the glare of the officer standing outside her door. His face was set in a scowl, his posture rigid with impatience. Grace lowered the window. "License and registration." His voice was rough, the demand leaving no room for hesitation. She reached for her purse, movements deliberate, careful not to give him any reason to escalate. But before she could even unzip it, his hand shot out, gripping the door handle. "Step out of the car." It wasn't a request. Grace hesitated for only a fraction of a second, just long enough for his expression to darken. "Now." She unbuckled her seatbelt, the click of the release loud in the sudden silence. The door swung open with unnecessary force as the officer yanked it wide, his other hand already reaching for her. Grace stepped onto the pavement, the chill of the evening air biting through her jacket. She barely had time to steady herself before his fingers closed around her arm, pulling her roughly to the side of the car. "Officer," "Quiet." His grip tightened, his other hand resting conspicuously near his holster. From the corner of her eye, Grace saw the second cop, younger, her face pale under the streetlights, step forward. "Mark, she hasn't done anything." "Stay out of it, Emily." His voice was a warning. Grace straightened, rolling her shoulders back. She knew this game, knew the way men like him wielded authority like a weapon, testing, pushing, seeing how far they could go before someone pushed back. "This is harassment," she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "I know my rights." Officer Anderson, Mark, leaned in, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Out here, rights are what I say they are." A beat of silence. Then his grip shifted, shoving her against the car hard enough to make her stumble. Her bag slipped from her shoulder, hitting the pavement with a thud, its contents scattering. Keys, phone, a small notepad. Grace exhaled sharply but didn't react beyond that. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "This is completely unnecessary," she said, keeping her tone even. "I've complied with everything you've asked." Mark ignored her, crouching to rifle through her belongings without permission. His movements were methodical, deliberate, like he was searching for something, anything, to justify this. "What's a woman like you doing driving a car like this?" he muttered, as if the luxury of the vehicle itself was suspicious. Emily, the rookie, took another step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "Mark, this isn't protocol. We don't have probable cause to—" "You've got a lot to learn, rookie," he snapped, not even looking up. "This is how you keep the streets clean." Grace's patience snapped. "Officer Anderson, you are violating my rights. You have no reason to search my property." Mark straightened, holding up one of her credit cards like it was some kind of damning evidence. "You don't get to lecture me, lady. You're in my town now." A crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the flashing lights and raised voices. Murmurs rippled through them, phones lifted, recording. Grace noticed but didn't look away from Mark. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Then, Emily's breath hitched. Grace didn't see it at first, but Emily did. Mark's hand dipped into his pocket, palming something small, a plastic bag, white powder inside. Her stomach dropped. "No." He leaned into the car, just for a second, his body blocking the view. But Emily saw the way his hand moved, slipping the bag beneath the driver's seat. Her pulse roared in her ears. Mark turned back to the crowd, holding up the bag with a flourish. "Well, well," he announced, his voice dripping with false triumph. "Looks like we've got a little drug situation here." Grace's eyes widened, real shock, real fury flashing across her face. "That's not mine. You just planted that." Mark smirked. "That's a nice story, but it's not going to hold up." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some shouting in disbelief. Emily's hands shook. She had seen it, she knew. And now she had to choose. The plastic bag dangled from Mark's fingers. the white powder inside catching the flickering streetlight like some cheap party trick. Grace's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her expression steeled. She had been in worse situations. She had faced men like him before, men who thought power was something you took by force, not something you earned. But this wasn't just about her anymore. The crowd had thickened, their murmurs swelling into something louder, angrier. Phones were still raised, recording. A woman near the front shouted, "We all saw what you did." Mark's smirk faltered for half a second before he recovered, his voice booming over the noise. "This is police business. Back up." Grace didn't move. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet Emily's gaze. The rookie cop stood frozen, her knuckles white where they gripped her belt, their eyes locked. Grace's steady, Emily's wide, with something between panic and realization. "You saw it." Grace didn't say it aloud. She didn't have to. Emily's throat worked as she swallowed. Mark was too busy playing to the crowd to notice. "You're under arrest for possession," he announced, reaching for his cuffs with one hand while the other still held the bag aloft. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Grace's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "You planted that." A ripple went through the bystanders. Mark's jaw tightened. "That's enough out of you." Grace didn't blink. "You reached into your pocket. You had that bag before you ever searched my car." "Bullshit." "It's on camera," Grace said, nodding toward the sea of phones. "All of them." For the first time, Mark hesitated. His eyes darted to the crowd, to the lenses fixed on him. His fingers twitched around the cuffs. Emily's breath came too fast. She could feel it. The moment tipping, the weight of what was happening pressing down on her chest. She had seen it. She knew. And if she stayed quiet now, she was just as guilty as he was. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "You don't get to pick when to do the right thing. You either do it or you live with the fact that you didn't." Her hands shook. "Then she's right." The words were out before she could stop them. Every head turned toward her. Mark's expression darkened. "What did you say?" Emily's voice wavered, but she didn't back down. "I saw you. You planted it." Silence. Then the crowd erupted. Mark's face went red. "You're finished, Carter. You hear me? You'll never work in this town again." Grace didn't give him the chance to say more. In one smooth motion, she reached into her jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She flipped it open, revealing the badge inside. "Actually," she said, her voice calm, "I think it's you who won't be working here much longer." Mark's eyes locked onto the badge. His mouth opened, then closed. "Captain Grace Williams," she said, "Internal Affairs." The crowd's noise swelled. Someone cheered. Mark took a step back, his bravado crumbling. This is a setup." Grace didn't smile. "No, this is accountability." Emily's legs felt weak. She hadn't known. She had just done what was right. Mark's hand twitched toward his holster. Grace's voice snapped out, sharp as a whip. "Don't." He froze. The two backup officers who had just arrived hesitated, their eyes darting between Mark and Grace. Grace didn't look away from Mark. "Holster your weapon. Hand over your badge. Now." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with a snarl, Mark yanked his badge off his chest and threw it at Grace's feet. "You're dead, Williams. You hear me? Dead." Grace didn't flinch. She just nodded to the other officers. "Take him in." As they moved forward, Mark lunged, not at Grace, but at Emily. "You traitor." Grace moved faster. She caught his arm, twisting it behind his back in one brutal motion. Mark gasped, his knees hitting the pavement. The crowd roared. Grace leaned down, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Try that again, I dare you." Then she straightened, nodding to the officers. "Get him out of here." As they hauled Mark away, the crowd's cheers followed him. Grace turned to Emily. The rookie looked shell-shocked, her face pale. Grace's expression softened, just a fraction. "You did good, kid." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Grace clapped a hand on her shoulder. "Now let's go clean up the rest of this mess." The precinct was in chaos. News vans crowded the street outside, reporters shouting over each other as cameras flashed through the windows. Inside, officers moved in hushed clusters, their voices low, their eyes darting toward Grace where she stood at the center of the storm. Emily hovered near the doorway, her hands clenched at her sides. The adrenaline hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled into something heavier, something that sat like a stone in her chest. She had done the right thing. She knew that. But the cost of it was only now beginning to sink in. Mark was gone, suspended, maybe worse, and she had been the one to help take him down. Grace's voice cut through the noise, calm and commanding. "Everyone, listen up." The room fell silent. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. What happened tonight was unacceptable. It was a betrayal of the badge, of the people we're sworn to protect. Her gaze swept over the assembled officers. But it's also an opportunity, a chance to do better, starting now. A few heads nodded, others stayed stubbornly still. Emily recognized the expressions. Some were relieved, some were angry, some were scared. And some, she realized with a chill, looked at Grace the same way they'd once looked at Mark. Grace didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't care. Effective immediately, all pending cases tied to Officer Anderson will be reviewed. Any arrests, any evidence, it gets looked at again. If there's even a hint of misconduct, we make it right. A murmur rippled through the room. One of the older officers, Sergeant Hale, stepped forward, his face tight. "Captain, with all due respect, that could take months. The workload—" "Then we work nights," Grace said simply. "This isn't negotiable." Hale's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. Grace turned back to the room. "I won't lie to you. This won't be easy. But if you're not willing to do the job right, hand me your badge now." No one moved. Grace nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." The crowd dispersed, officers breaking off into muttered conversations. Emily stayed where she was, unsure where she fit in all of this. Grace spotted her and crossed the room. "You holding up?" Emily swallowed. "I don't know." Grace studied her for a moment, then nodded toward her office. "Come on." Inside, the noise of the precinct faded to a dull hum. Grace shut the door and leaned against her desk, arms crossed. "You're wondering if it was worth it." Emily hesitated. I didn't expect it to feel like this." "Like you're standing on the edge of a cliff," Grace offered. "Yeah," Grace sighed. "First time you stand up for what's right, it always feels like that. Like you're alone. Like you're the only one who cares." She tilted her head. "But you're not." Emily looked down at her hands. "Some of them hate me now." "Some of them hated you the second you put on the badge," Grace said bluntly, "because you're not like them, and that's a good thing." Emily didn't answer. Grace pushed off the desk. "Listen to me, Carter. What you did tonight, that's what this job is supposed to be. Not covering for each other, not looking the other way. Justice." She held Emily's gaze. "You want to walk away, I won't stop you. But if you stay, you could change things." Emily's chest tightened. She thought of Mark's sneer, of the way he'd looked at Grace, at her. She thought of the crowd's cheers. She lifted her chin. "I'm staying." Grace smiled, just a little. "Good." Outside, the cameras still flashed, the reporters still shouted. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. If you liked this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with others so they can learn something from it too.